Recently, I've been getting a lot of questions from younger people on my channel about how to become a marine biologist. And I don't think that a lot of people fully understand all of the really important things to consider that come along with being in academia, of being an academic. It's not just all fun in the field. So I've come up with a list of things I've kind of gathered in the past few years of talking to professionals, researchers, master's and graduate students, of really important things that I am glad I know now before applying to grad programs, and things I wish I knew earlier about pursuing a PhD. So the very first thing I wanted to mention is that in academia, you can get a master's and get some positions in academia and be happy, but to move forward and have all the opportunities in the world, there's a lot of pressure to get a PhD. So with that being said, the very first thing to consider is how many years of school are you okay with? Because if you are committing to the full process, that could be up to 10 or more. If you're doing 4 years of undergrad, 2 to 3 of a master's, and 5 of a PhD, it's a lot of years of school, and you have to ask yourself if you're going to be okay with starting your career into your late 20s at the earliest. You have to ask yourself if you're going to be okay with the strains and stress that come along with being a student for a very long time. The next thing to consider that was a really important story that I heard my junior year was the story of how my marine biology professor got her job. She interviewed for an entry-level position at my university at FSU, and over 200 applicants also were applying for this position, and only 3 were interviewed and only 1 person got it. So important to consider if you're trying to go into academia, if you want to be a researcher, is how competitive it is. There are only so many positions available for professors and researchers. There are a lot more PhDs. So you have to distinguish yourself. You have to be more driven than other people. Now, we were at a really good university. At FSU is an R1 institution. It's pretty well established even for marine biology too. So that's something to consider too, but it is very competitive to get a professor kind of position. So the next thing to consider in academia is, because it's so competitive and because it's so niche specific, you really have to move where the jobs are. I've seen this issue come up with a few mentors of mine that are professors, and they had to do some really crazy things to make their family work, to stay together. Academia is very unique in that once you have a PhD, you have very niched down, very specific field experience. You have very specific research experience. So there's only so many positions that fit that kind of experience. So you really have to cast your net for jobs so wide to find one that is going to work. So if you have a spouse in academia, this is kind of a better scenario, because at some universities they'll offer this option to where if you're accepted, they'll also accept your spouse as another entry-level position, entry-level professor. I've seen this happen with 2 different professors that I've been in contact with. I've also seen something crazy play out with a mentor I had at a conference I went to. She was a professor, her husband was a professor, but they could only find jobs in different states. And they also had kids. So the dad had to live separate from the wife, and the kids lived with the wife, and they kind of visited each other as much as they could until she could find a better job closer. So important things to consider of the family aspect and the spouse and where you're going to live. It's definitely can be really challenging as someone in academia to find the right job in the right place. The next thing, which is probably one of the most shocking things that I learned when I was figuring out more about master's and PhD, is that you can overqualify yourself when you have a PhD. This is really an important concept to wrap your head around, that a PhD can overqualify you for a substantial amount of positions. At smaller organizations and businesses, they oftentimes are going to pick someone with a master's over someone with a PhD because there is a different expectation for salary, because they're not expected to pay the master's as much as the PhD. And at smaller companies, smaller organizations, they often don't need the very niche specific specialization of someone with a PhD. So they can take someone with a master's. So if you are even considering working at some smaller organizations in the future, it's really important to consider this idea of overqualification. So this is obviously going to vary a lot across the board with organizations and companies, but generally you are going to run into some unexpected problems that you should definitely be aware of if you're considering getting a PhD and pursuing academia. Stepping over to a new field is not always easy. Now, I should also mention I have seen people switch out of academia into different industries like consulting, like the government. There's definitely plenty of options for PhD level positions. The problem I've just seen occur is when you try to go to these smaller organizations and companies that don't really have the need for someone with a PhD. The next thing that's really important to consider if you're trying to get into academia is the work-life balance and how it doesn't really exist. Because in academia, you are very, very often your own boss. You have your own independent work, your independent projects, you have students of your own. There's just no 9 to 5. It is up to you when you're gonna get deadlines done, when you are calling it off, when you are just no longer working anymore. And this can be really awesome for some people who just love being their own boss and they do not like when people are telling them what to do. And that works really well for some people that are really disciplined and really capable of just sticking to their own timetables. But for some people, this is really hard for several reasons. And for some people, they'll work themselves to death with no one telling them to stop. My supervisor in undergrad would literally work 80-hour weeks if no one told her to stop. She just never stopped working. And you have to consider, are you going to be someone like that? Is that going to affect your mental health? I mean, there's obviously, you can always work on that and continue getting better at it, but definitely something to consider with the intense pressure of being an academic. The other thing is that with no one telling you what to do and no solid deadlines except for the ones that you set for yourself most of the time, are you going to be able to push things forward and get things done? Because there's going to be a lot of people and things relying on you. The next thing I wanted to talk about kind of briefly is imposter syndrome. So imposter syndrome, if you haven't heard of it before, it's kind of just self-explanatory, but it's basically feeling like you don't belong and feeling like you don't have the capability or means to say or put your word in somewhere. And this is something that occurs at all levels. I've seen it in labs, it's occurred with myself, and at conferences I've attended, I've been a part of conversations with some professionals that experienced this too, which was kind of eye-opening that it's not just the little undergrads that feel like an imposter in a lab. These professors feel like imposters sometimes too in these really intense academic conversations with a lot of very niche specific experts. Everyone is kind of an expert in their own field, so it's really difficult to kind of have a say and feel really confident because you know everyone has a lot of pride and a lot of experience in very specific things, and someone is always going to know more than you. And it's really intimidating to get called out, and something that is just always going to happen in academia just because the way it's structured with very niche specific experts. So the next thing that's really important to consider with working in academia is 99% of the time, the funding is all up to you. You're going to be applying for grants constantly, and it is what your life is going to revolve around, is applying for funding and getting money. This is really challenging for some people to just have to constantly be on the lookout for different grants that are specific to your work, and to come up with all of the work and data to actually apply to it. This can be really challenging, but it's an essential part of being a researcher and being a professor, is just constantly applying for grants. And so some people find this really exciting and enjoyable, actually, of coming up with all of the information to show that their work is meaningful, to prove to someone, to prove to others that the work they do is meaningful. And this is something that I actually enjoyed when I was applying for a few grants, of kind of proving to others that my work matters. And it's extremely gratifying when you actually get a successful grant for it. It feels really great, but when you don't, it feels really bad. If you spend all this work and time and hours and hours and hours applying to grant just to get absolutely nothing from it except for wasted time, it hurts, but you have to get back up and keep applying for more. So the next thing is a very important concept in academia that everyone should be aware of, is this concept of publish or perish. And this is just something I've kept hearing over and over again in different professional conversations I've been in at my university and at some conferences I've attended, is this concept that if you're not publishing work, that you are not making it, that you are perishing in research and academia. And a lot of that, I think, comes from the fact that a publication is a very clear metric for your work as a researcher. It's going to be a really clear indication to track how many people are actually paying attention to your work. If you are putting it and getting accepted into really highly ranked and very popular journals, it's just a way to have your research showcased. So it's so important to be constantly producing these. And this can be really, really challenging for a lot of reasons, and mainly because research cannot always be rushed. It's sometimes, all the time, you're going to run into unforeseen problems that occur with your work that are going to make it really difficult to produce meaningful results. And so the problem then becomes producing meaningful research, keeping your position at a university, and not losing your position while producing publications all the time. You have to be producing publications because that is how university, research institutions, and the general world of academia kind of places value on you. A lot of times you just see the most renowned professors, called renowned because of the amount of times they've been cited, the amount of papers that they put out in established journals. It's so important to always be pushing out publications. So with all of that being said, all of these challenges, I do want to acknowledge that academia is a really cool field if you're meant for it. You get to be the leading expert on a specific topic, the person on Shark Week or whatever. You are the person, the expert on a topic. That's pretty cool and pretty empowering. You get to be someone that's on the cutting edge of new emerging technologies that are going to change the world, or strategies that are going to help the environment, or change the world for the better. So there are many, many careers in the world, and I hope this kind of opens up your mind a little bit and gets you thinking. Maybe you're still set on academia, which is awesome. If you've made it this far into the video, you probably are going to make it in the world of academia. But I definitely encourage still to just take things slow and to gain as much experience as you can in different fields, both with researchers and to fully understand what the life of a researcher is like yourself, and to put yourself in their shoes. And don't just get experience with one researcher, get experiences with different kinds of researchers, because different types of researchers do very different things and have very different lifestyles. But also get experience in different fields with internships and shadowing and volunteering in nonprofits or consulting, or just try your hand at a few different things. You might be surprised at how similar these jobs are to academia. There's many careers in the world. So anyway, thank you so much for watching, and let me know in the comments if you're, well, guess my light died here, but anyway, let me know in the comments if you are pursuing research, if you are in this kind of limbo just like me right now as a recent graduate and making the decision. It's definitely an interesting spot to be, considering going to grad school in post-pandemic world. But life goes on. Thank you so much for watching, and have a great rest of your day.